Hey Cubs, welcome back to the channel. This is the second part of the projects I was doing for my mother-in-law. Yes, I am filming this on the same day as the first intro. That's because we're actually heading home today. It's the first opportunity I had to actually film the intros. Very busy. Yeah, if you haven't seen the first part where I painted the concrete Buddha, go check that out. And if you have, stay here. Let's get going. Flower Fairy took a lot of prep work. She had quite a substantial crack both in the front of her neck and the back of her neck. I think she blew over at some point, and because she's not made of concrete, yeah, she broke quite easily. I also think she was partly hollow, certainly judging by the gap in the back of her neck, and I needed to use aluminium foil to fill that in, and then I went over all of the cracks with epoxy sculpts because there were a couple in her dress as well. I was quite excited to work on her, partly because, you know, flower fairies really need colour. They shouldn't be a dull grey like this, but also I had a small collection of flower fairy figurines in my teenage years, and in my research into them I discovered there were actually two main artists. Cecily Mary Barker, she seems to be the first one to have done it. However, this particular statue is a Margaret Tarrant Flower Fairy, and she was actually an illustrator before Cecily Mary Barker, being that much older than her, but it still seems she did them afterwards. But I couldn't find anything definitive as to who did it first. Certainly, as I say, Cecily Mary Barker was the more well-known of the two. The ones I had were indeed Margaret Tarrant ones, and I wanted to try and work out which of the flower fairies she was, which turned out to be a bit tricky because she's posed so differently to any of the artwork Margaret Tarrant actually did. Yeah, so as far as I could tell, she was the daffodil flower fairy, and I decided that's what I'd go with for the colour scheme. But I wanted to do things a bit different, didn't want to make her an exact copy. We'll get to that in a minute. Yeah, the repair job did take a while, but thankfully, with it being the start of the heat wave, as I mentioned in the last video, you know, it helped her dry really quickly, and then I was able to work on cleaning her up as best I could. Again, like with the Buddha from last time, I don't know how long she's been in the garden. I didn't have the proper cleaning supplies to get rid of the lichen that had attached itself to her, but you know, I did my best, and actually the paints covered it up quite well, anything that was remaining. And here we go, on to the painting. This was just so much fun. Not sure why I started with the hair. It does seem an odd place to start, I know, but for whatever reason, that's what I decided to do. I was going to say it's possible it was leftover paint from the Buddha, but there's just no way because of how hot it was. The paint was drying in the palette way too fast. So it's definitely not that. I think it was just wanting to start somewhere small, to get the hang of it. And the hair was very, very detailed, which again made it all that more enjoyable. Just being able to pick out all the detail that kind of, you know, you can see it in when she's grey, but it's not as obvious, and she definitely looks better with the colour. As you can see, she kind of looks like she's got a neck brace on now with the epoxy sculpt, but I think it blended quite well once she was painted. When we go back, I will have to make some touch-ups because, as I mentioned in the last video, I hadn't taken any extra white paint with me, so particularly her skin's quite patchy. I managed to get a very thin base coat of white down, but again, because I was so limited to the white paint, it ran out so fast, and her skin's ended up patchy in places, so I will need to go back in and fix that. And after the white base coat, I could finally move on to the colour. Now, as I mentioned, I did use Margaret Tarrant's own Flower Fairies as reference, and like I said, this is the daffodil one that I used for reference in particular. However, I didn't want to stick completely to her designs. I wanted to put my own sort of take into them, particularly into the wings. I wanted the wings to stand out from her, because in the original design they just kind of blended in, and yeah, I just thought it'd be a bit fun to do something a bit different. It did take me a while to decide how I was going to do it, which is why I started with the yellow of the dress. And as with the previous video, I had to do a lot of work on her off camera. I can't remember how many coats of yellow I needed to do in the end, but it was a fair few. And here I'm just dry brushing again like I did with the Buddha. Again, doing dark over the top rather than the light. I wanted it more to be sort of folds in the material, not light, sort of, you know, shading, highlights, that sort of stuff. You know, that wasn't my aim for any of this. Yeah, so again, the yellow looks really nice on her. Yellow isn't a colour I use all that often in my own artwork, and it just made me think that maybe I should use it a bit more, because I really like how it looks. Now, as you can see, I did orange under her sleeves, but I do make quite a big mistake in a few minutes where you see the gap on the sort of between the folds of her dress, and the colour choice I used for that was not a good choice at all, and I did have to go over it several times because of the colour difference. She's just got a little ribbon round her waist. Painted that in orange as well. Again, this was quite tricky without my detailing brushes, because I didn't think I'd need them. You know, I didn't think there was that finer detail on these, but I was wrong. And here I go with the first coat of pink for the skin. And yeah, as I said, it definitely needs touching up when we go back. apart from not having enough of the white to mix with the red to make the pink, because of the heat wave, as I mentioned earlier, the paint was drying out so fast in the palette once I mixed it. It meant I had to mix it several times, make fresh batches, so I went through it a lot quicker, and just colour matching was a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. But again, that was mostly due to the lack of white, so each time there was sort of less white in it, so it did make things tricky. So also painting between her legs was very difficult because they're quite close together. So yeah, that was definitely a hard to reach place. Here we go with the wings, and I decided to use contrasting colours because I really like contrasting colours. Something I've sort of got more into, particularly since starting the channel. And for this I used a reference of a common blue morpho butterfly. It's not one I knew of particularly. You know, it's actually found in parts of, I think it was South Africa. I forgot to make a note of that, but certainly not in the UK anyway. But I did realise right at the end, when I thought I'd finished, I did make a slight error on the back of the wings, but you know, it still looks good. And again, the butterfly is something I would want to do more of because it was just so much fun doing that. Yeah, I was filming at night as well, sort of past sundown, because like I say, we were on limited time and I really wanted to get her finished, so I was doing this at every opportunity I could. So please excuse the lighting. I was doing the best with what I had, which is what I do anyway, so you know, nothing changes. Not yet anyway. And here's where I make the mistake with the dress and choose green to go underneath it. I don't know why I chose this. I think I was thinking that it tied in with the hat and the base, but it looks okay on camera, but actually in reality it just looked horrendous. So I do end up going over that with orange, which, because it's orange over green, took so many coats. The base she stood on is grass, and there are several flowers dotted about in it, so I pick all the details out as well. Originally the green I'd used was way too dark, because that was a dark green before I started painting just then, and yeah, I went over that because it just looked terrible. And on with the details on the wings, which I just love doing the detail, you know, bringing everything together, making it look its best. It's so much fun. And doing the back of the wings was tricky though, because of how close together they were, and especially trying to get it so you guys could see what I was doing. Some of it you can, but when I get into the inside, not so much. But again, like with the Buddha, I am going to let you guys enjoy the end of this video. I'll include the photos from the end results. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you guys next time.